Agatha All Along finally released yesterday, and I gotta say, I had pretty low expectations heading into the show, and had read or watched very little in regards to it, and I was actually quite impressed with the first two episodes. When watching the first two episodes of Agatha All Along, I noticed that Agatha, while in her delirious Agnes persona, had an empty child's bedroom, and there was an award on a shelf that had a name on it: Nicholas Scratch. To many, this is a name that won't mean much, but this is actually a reference to Agatha's actual son, Nicholas Scratch, from Marvel Comics. In fact, in the comics, Nicholas Scratch is actually kind of a major villain that has squared off with the Fantastic Four in the past. While they likely had to greatly adjust much of the comic source material to fit it into the MCU, I wonder if this is meant to simply be an Easter egg for hardcore fans, or if this is actually meant to foreshadow the arrival of Nicholas Scratch as a villain, one that Agatha herself may have to face. I would find it odd if it were simply a meaningless Easter egg, as the audience is clearly intended to be able to see the name of Agatha's supposedly fictional child. Yet, while the scenarios we see her living out during the first episode are fictional, the people in them are not, as we still see those people when Agatha finally breaks free from Wanda's spell. Of course, this includes Rio Vidal, who's heavily hinted to be a former romantic partner of Agatha's. Considering that we see a child's bedroom with the name Nicholas Scratch, it could very well mean Nicholas Scratch does or did exist in the MCU. Perhaps he really did die, or perhaps she is estranged from her child for some reason. Nicholas Scratch is also significant because he is the progenitor of the Salem Seven, as he is the father of all of them. While this may not be the case in the MCU, as we so far know so little about him, and the first episode of Agatha All Along is the first and only reference to him yet in the MCU. This could of course change in the coming weeks as Agatha and her newly formed coven travel down the Witch's Road, as we will most definitely be learning more about Agatha's past. Moreover, the Witch's Road is a parallel dimension in which time and space become a little wonky. Thus, we may even get some cameos of other characters, though I wouldn't count on it. Though it's fascinating to include a reference to Nicholas Scratch, and then in the same episode introduce the Salem Seven. Perhaps they aren't actually connected in this series, but it's something that would be interesting to see integrated into the show, as Agatha is hundreds of years old, and could easily have mothered a child named Nicholas Scratch that went on to father the Salem Seven. The Salem Seven we see in Agatha All Along, though, are drastically different from their comic depictions, as all of the seven appear to be women and all are cloaked in black, looking like Nazgul from Lord of the Rings. In the comics, the Salem Seven are the magically augmented children of Nicholas Scratch, making them the biological grandchildren of Agatha Harkness. The Salem Seven in Agatha All Along are unlikely to be the grandchildren of Agatha, though perhaps they could find a way to work it in, considering part of the reason Agatha has managed to remain so young is due to the Darkhold and her ability to absorb the power and life force from others. Perhaps her grandchildren in the MCU have not been so lucky and haven't exactly aged well, though I'm not so sure that will be the case, as it would be difficult to pull off with how they have already been introduced and depicted. Agatha doesn't act as though she's related to the Salem Seven, only that she is fearful of them. As opposed to the comics, we see some pretty basic abilities from the Seven and Agatha All Along. Aside from their ability to transform into animals, which again, diverts from the comics. In the comics, the Seven have the ability to transform into unique creatures with superhuman strengths and special abilities. In contrast, all we really know about the Seven in the MCU is that they are seemingly powerful witches that can all transform into a specific animal, and use pretty typical magic blasts, and move as though they are reanimated corpses at times. Based on the major departures that have already been taken from the comics, especially when it comes to Agatha Harkness and the Scarlet Witch, I don't see the Salem Seven being the grandchildren of Agatha, though I do believe that they have a connection to her. If you re-watch the scene from WandaVision, in which we see Agatha's origins when she is placed on trial by her coven, she is condemned to death by what appears to be 7 witches. Is it possible that the Salem Seven in the MCU are actually Agatha's reanimated coven? We have seen many times in the past that whether it's hit or miss, Marvel will narratively recycle characters they no longer have a purpose for, to fill other roles, so it feels as though it's all within the same universe. For example, the travesty that was MODOK being Darren Cross from the first Ant-Man movie. Sure, it could entirely be a coincidence that the number of witches that attempted to execute Agatha matches the Salem Seven, but it may also be a clever way of reusing characters from Agatha's past to introduce lesser-known villains like the Salem Seven. As I mentioned earlier, they seem to move as though they are reanimated corpses, and perhaps this was an intentional choice to demonstrate that these were witches slain by Agatha, especially as they clearly have a vendetta against her specifically for some unknown reason. Of course, I don't necessarily know why they would be reanimated, or alive, or whatever they are technically, but they have a very deathly, eerie vibe to not only their appearances, but also to their voices. The name Salem 7 would not only fit the Agatha's Old Coven in number, but Agatha's Old Coven was based in Salem in the 1600s. Thus, it would be quite fitting to call Agatha's former coven that she betrayed the Salem 7. The 7 witches slain by Agatha Harkness in her pursuit of power. While I think the Salem 7 very well may be the former coven of Agatha Harkness, I also wonder if we'll get a bit of a twist and the teen in the series will turn out to not actually be Billy Maximoff, but Nicholas Scratch. Sure, everyone is theorizing and assuming that Joe Locke's teen character in Agatha All Along is Wiccan, one of the Scarlet Witch's sons. I wonder if he may actually be Agatha's son. Like I mentioned earlier, every person in Agatha's delusional state under Wanda's spell was actually real, and so it would follow that references to Nicholas Scratch would mean that he does in fact exist in the real world and not simply in her fantasy. Evidence does certainly point to the teen character in fact being Wiccan, but it hasn't actually been confirmed by Marvel or the actor as of yet. He certainly looks like he could be Billy Maximoff a bit more grown up, and we even see that for some reason he can't tell Agatha his name or where he's from, other than hearing he's from Eastview. When he tries to say his name to Agatha, his mouth is sealed by an elaborate M symbol that looks like it would belong to someone like the Scarlet Witch, with the M standing for Maximoff, though it could also refer to something else like Mephisto. Wanda certainly would have had the power to cast a spell such as this, and it would make sense that she wouldn't want people knowing his name is actually Billy Maximoff, or that he is in any way related to the Scarlet Witch. It especially wouldn't be a positive thing anywhere in or near Westview. Moreover, the fact that the teen character has a boyfriend makes it seem as though he could be Wiccan, who has had a boyfriend in the comics. Though, what fascinates me most about this character is that if he has a boyfriend, does that boyfriend actually know his name? Is no one able to hear his name or backstory, or is that simply restricted to Agatha for some reason? If only Agatha is restricted from hearing the name and backstory of the teen, then it would suggest someone sealed that information off from her specifically. The likely answer here is that it was Wanda, considering the M symbol and his similar appearance to Billy. However, what if this is actually a tactic by Wanda, or possibly someone else, to prevent Agatha from interacting with her child? Wanda was pretty cold to Agatha and trapped her in a fairly torturous spell by most people's standards. Perhaps Wanda also set up a spell to bar Agatha from ever getting to know her own son personally. And sure, Agatha isn't exactly a good person, but that would be a pretty stone-cold move on the part of Wanda if that is the case. So perhaps rather than actually being the child of Wanda Maximoff, he may be the child of Agatha Harkness, Nicholas Scratch. Of course, we don't know this to be true yet, and the obvious reveal would be that he's actually Billy Maximoff, but I think it would be much more fitting for the teen to actually be the son of Agatha, as it would provide a close and personal connection for Agatha that could ultimately act as a turning point for her character. Another detail that I think really adds to this is that when we're first introduced to the teen character, he had just broken into Agatha's house in her delusional state, and in her delusional state, he was attempting to steal something from Nicholas Scratch's bedroom, which kind of to me seems to be a hint that he may in fact actually be her son, Nicholas Scratch. However, Nicholas Scratch is a villain in the comics that turns on Agatha, so it's also possible the teen is hiding his real identity as Nicholas Scratch to ultimately turn on Agatha on the Witch's Road journey. The Witch's Road is supposed to grant those who walk to the end of the road with what they need most, and perhaps in the case of Agatha Harkness, what she may need most is family. Perhaps what she may need the most is Nicholas Scratch.